Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be before you today and to entertain all your jokes about my suit. Happy to see you. So, no, you know what's awesome? What's awesome is this bill that's before you today. That's what's awesome. So, no, this is a fantastic piece of legislation. It's going to do a lot of good things for Minnesota, a lot of smart ideas. A lot of things are not necessarily bigger government or smaller government, but rather smarter government. And this is the kind of thing that I think we can have strong support for as we go forward this session in compromising and working with both the governor's office and the Senate. So a lot of good things. Before I get into the specifics of the jobs and economic growth portion of it, I'll defer to the highly respected chairman of the Environment Finance Committee to cover some of the provisions in his article in the bill.
Well, I thought you were going to do all yours first, Pat. No,
Oh, no.
okay. Nice suit. Welcome, everybody. I guess it's afternoon now. The environment bill's pretty straightforward. As you know, we fully funded the divisions last year. A couple of major updates in our bill would be the money for the DNR to use for the possible legal fights in regards to the polymet proposal. There's significant money governor's request in the bill. And then there's some supplemental funding for DNR parks. That's really the major parts of the finance bills that we'll be dealing with in our division. And I'll leave it up to Representative Hamilton to talk about the good work in ag.
And unlike Chair McNamara, I don't like your suit, so. I'm just teasing. So in agriculture, first of all, I'm honored to be able to chair the Agriculture Finance Committee. I've said in ag, we're bipartisan, if not nonpartisan. Last year, we focused heavily on avian influenza and food safety this year as well, and research last year. This year, we wanted to build off of the avian influenza piece and be proactive as it pertains to other emerging diseases. And so we're giving some additional flexibility to the Department of Agriculture and the Board of Animal Health, and also investing at the University of Minnesota Veterinary and Diagnostic Lab on additional equipment there and additional equipment to the Department of Agriculture. Chair Paul Anderson had a strong focus on farm safety, and so there's an initiative in the bill as well. So the two main focal points are addressing emerging diseases and farm safety. Yeah, it's too high.
You're pretty tall.
Yeah, I already tried it.
So within the jobs and economic development portion, we're very proud of this. Fully funds the Lewis and Clark water infrastructure for southwestern Minnesota. Over the next 2 years, it provides over $40 million in technological infrastructure, broadband funding, and that's going to leverage both federal and private dollars. So over the next 2 years, you're looking at $250 million of broadband infrastructure in the state of Minnesota, primarily in greater Minnesota. So these are big advances. In addition, there's some important regulatory reforms in the bill that modernizes our telecommunications regulation industry, that moves us from a sort of a static 1900s model to a 21st century regulatory scheme that it takes into account the new technologies that are before us. And to pay for this, we do it in a Minnesota smart way. What we're doing is we're reducing corporate subsidies and special perks for specific businesses that right now are primarily benefiting the 11-county metro area, and we're repurposing these funds for investments in infrastructure development in greater Minnesota. And so we view this as a very positive bill, something that should have bipartisan support. Very proud of this bill, very happy to be chairing this committee, and when you add in Representative McNamara's bill as well as Representative Hamilton's bill, some very good provisions that I look forward to closing out the session with. So happy to take your questions on the provisions in the bill.
Representative Garofalo, are you abolishing the film board, and is that a good idea?
Yes, we're getting rid of the film board, and quite simply because we think there are better ways to create jobs for Minnesotans than by incentivizing the entertainment industry.
Could you talk about that a little bit? They've done a lot of work for the state. They say they're bringing more money in for every dollar spent. Why is that not a good idea for something that is actually making money, they say, economic development?
Well, we think there's better ways to make money that are going to have a more positive result. So as, for example, you'll notice that we fund the Department of Tourism to promote economic development across the state, particularly with regards to the Mille Lacs situation, where we want to get the word out to people that there's some world-class fishing still going on in Mille Lacs. We know that in the area of tourism, this is something that benefits the entire state, not specific industries, and we want to make sure that we're bringing visitors to Minnesota. They're going to spend a lot more money and give us more bang for the buck. In addition, you'll see that we invested in infrastructure in greater Minnesota, both water infrastructure in southwestern Minnesota as well as technological infrastructure. We think these are more permanent jobs, higher paying jobs with a more geographic diversity across the state with a better rate of return for the taxpayer.
Better than the entertainment industry, is that what you mean?
Absolutely. So, for example, by incentivizing and developing growth in the tourism industry, by solving the water infrastructure issues in southwestern Minnesota, and by investing in technology across the state of Minnesota, those are going to give us far better bang for the buck.
Several states have gone the other direction on the type of work the Film Board does by offering more incentives to these filmmakers to come into their states. Minnesota used to have a burgeoning film industry, and it's pretty much dried up as the money has dried up. Any concern about that, or is that just not a priority?
Well, there's no doubt that there are specific corporate giveaways and specific subsidies that are incentivizing certain developments in certain states. There's no doubt about it. But the approach in Minnesota has been to a more favorable business climate for all businesses in Minnesota, and again, to bring that better rate of return on infrastructure as well as in the tourism sectors that benefit a wider range of Minnesota. Again, when you look at the rate of return on these investments, I will not dispute that there is some return on the film board. There is a better rate of return for the investments that we're making in this bill.
Well, is this because it's a Democratic program? It's a favorite of the Democrats. They've got $10 million in the Senate. This is something that they have pushed for years.
Well, I think the Democrats for years, regardless of the solution, regardless of the problem, they've had the same solution, and that's higher taxes on Minnesotans to pay for more government spending. So it's not really in regard to what their proposal is. Again, we just look at the data on this and we find that it's a better solution that provides a higher rate of return and better job growth. So take, for example, the Minnesota Investment Fund and the Job Creation Fund, which we're reducing in this bill as well. Those programs right now, well in excess of 70% of the jobs created are in the 11-county metro area. That doesn't work for greater Minnesota. That doesn't work for the areas of the state that have the highest rates of unemployment. So we're proposing a new way, a smarter way of making these investments.
Mr. Chairman, your investment in broadband, at least upfront investment, is a fraction of what the governor has proposed and a fraction of what Senate Democrats want. They will say that it's just not doing the job. How do you respond to that?
Well, again, there's $40 million in this bill from the state side. This leverages federal funding as well as private sector matches, which will be in excess of $250 million in the next 2 years in Minnesota. There's going to be, to the contrary, for the people are saying that there's a lack of investment in broadband. It's the exact opposite. We've actually got so much investment coming that we may have a shortage in workers in terms of fiber optic cabling, trenching, installing this infrastructure. That's going to be a bigger concern. It's not that there's going to be a lack of money being spent on it. The state's portion of it, that $40 million, is being leveraged big time by private sector dollars as well as the federal dollars.
And the money that you are allocating for racial economic disparities is again, a small fraction of what the governor is proposing, and what Senate Democrats are proposing, and there are those who say that it's totally inadequate. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would disagree. I think you see, if you look in the bill, that there is strong bipartisan support for the measures that are included in the bill. These are not just Republican bills, but they're Democrat bills that are focused on not only the ethnic disparities in the Twin Cities metro area, but also the communities across the state of Minnesota that have high ethnic concentrations. So places like Wilmer and Faribault, these programs are going to benefit them. Again, I respect the fact that no matter, a government that spends enough money in the eyes of a Democrats it doesn't exist. It's like the boogeyman or the tooth fairy. It's imaginary. No matter what it is, they're going to want to spend more. But we feel very confident that these are some good programs that have strong bipartisan support. Specifically, as to highlight one, it's one that's called Ujamaa Place. Representative Moran from St. Paul. This is where they take young men who are, many have criminal backgrounds, come from broken families, and they are going to be able to, with the appropriation in this, if we stop one young man from returning to prison, this program pays for itself. If anyone in the press is interested, I would go visit that place and see the good work they do, literally saving people's lives. So I reject the notion that the Democrats offer that somehow, because their number is bigger than ours, that they care more.
Well, the African-American leaders in the Twin Cities say that there's not only not enough money here, but that it's directed in the wrong way. So for example, ways to help African-American businesses. So there's $100 million worth of programs we're talking about. Housing help in North Minneapolis, for example. Why aren't you going that direction, that the African-American leaders put out a plan and said, this is what we need?
Well, we've been very clear since last year at the focus, the way to solve this problem, the first, best, and original way to do this is to address education. We have in current law bipartisan support that provides tax deductions, tax credits to incentivize parental choice, parental involvement, and we think that's the best way to do it. Again, not by reacting to the symptom, but rather by identifying the root cause. Education is the answer. As a wise man once said, education is never the problem, it's always the solution. Rod Hamilton said that. It's absolutely true in this case. In the state of Minnesota right now, we have some amazing public schools, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and rural areas, which have very high ethnic percentages. They're getting better academic performance, Pat, than they're seeing in some of the high-buck suburbs. That's the sort of stuff that needs to be happening. That's how we solve the problem, is by putting a focus on education, starting on the front side. Again, we are responding to these concerns and we are addressing them with some very meaningful legislation. I respect the fact that whatever it is, the Democrats want to spend more, but at the end of the day, this is a very good bill that moves Minnesota forward.
This response to the unrest in North Minneapolis over the last 6 months, the Black Lives Matter movement with saying that we have such economic disparities for years, we have to figure out a way to deal with it. You think this deals with all of that?
I think it moves Minnesota in the right direction, but again, the focus, the first, original, and best way to solve this problem is improving the education system in Minnesota.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if that is indeed correct, if, let's say your opponents even concede that, and I suspect that they probably do, does your bill do enough to solve the problem of the crumbling infrastructure and the crumbling neighborhoods in North Minneapolis where people are getting shot now, not at the point where you run kids through the school system and 12 years from now or 5 years from now, maybe you see some improvement? Does it address that? That's what some folks are going to say it does not do.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's important for all of Minnesotans to realize that one of the biggest problems we have with the racial disparities funding, in fact, disparities issues across the state of Minnesota, is as a culture, we are far too quick to judge and we are far too slow to forgive. Now, that's not legislation, that's not bigger government or higher taxes or more spending. Culturally, we need to realize that we all make mistakes and we have to give people a second chance. That's a cultural thing that I can't solve through legislation. With regards to crumbling infrastructure, I guess I would need an example from you that you're citing from there. But in this jobs bill, what we're doing is we're taking people who are in tough situations, who lack the skills to get jobs in the current workforce. We're reforming those systems. We're putting additional resources into them so that people are able to access these programs that have a proven track record of working, particularly those young with a criminal record, young certain ethnic backgrounds who are really lacking, who are getting left behind in the Obama economy right now. We want to make sure that they're getting access to the workforce. There's a huge shortage of workers in the Twin Cities metro area right now. Businesses are constantly complaining about it. At the same time, we have employees who are people who are unemployed. We have to bring those businesses together with the skill sets that those employees need to make sure that they get into the employment roles. I feel very, very strongly in this area that there's going to be strong bipartisan support when this session wraps up.
On the disparities issue, is there anything specifically in here for Native Americans? Or how would they benefit from your bill?
Well, I think when you have benefits like the neighborhood development centers as well as the apprenticeship program, those are statewide programs. We don't specifically target ethnicity with those. But I would think that those sorts of programs that benefit all Minnesotans certainly doesn't exclude any groups from it.
Now back to broadband.
Yeah.
Straighten this out, if you will. Does the $7 million for education hotspots and that type of thing, is that part of the 40 million overall, or is that on top of 40 million?
That's on top of the 40 million.
So it's 47 million you have, the House Republicans would have for broadband. Is that accurate?
I believe that's the number that's in the education bill is 7 million, yes. But I mean, for this bill, it's $40 million that we're leveraging, but that's on top of the federal match as well as the private sector match, which is in excess of $250 million over 2 years.
And are you saying that the state could not spend the 85 million or 100 million in a year?
Oh, I never dispute government's ability to spend money. The point is that when we're making these investments, there's a private sector that administers and invests this infrastructure. They have to staff up. They have to have the tools and the equipment to do that. $250 million of technological infrastructure in 2 years is a ton of money.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have you take a step back, talk about the tourism dollars that you're reappropriating. How much more to the tourism board to help promote Mille Lacs in some of the rural areas?
So we have the governor's proposal for $300,000 to promote Mille Lacs. And again, people need to understand there's world-class fishing up in Mille Lacs. Just because of the restrictions on walleye fishing doesn't mean that they're not open for business. They are. So the governor's proposal for that, $300,000. In addition, we have a one-time grant for $500,000 to help the Minnesota Department of Tourism recruit major, large-scale events to the state. These are ones that provide hundreds of millions of dollars of economic impact. And so that's definitely a big bang for the buck and something that we support.
What other, I think you called it corporate subsidies, are you eliminating to find some money here?
Well, we're not eliminating, we're reducing the corporate subsidies that are in the Minnesota Investment Fund and the Job Creation Fund. And again, 70% of those jobs are being created in the 11-county metro area. The metro area has a red-hot economy right now. We think a better strategy is, again, to get invested in infrastructure, primarily in greater Minnesota, and then to have a more favorable business climate for all the businesses in Minnesota. That's the better way to grow jobs as opposed to trying to pick winners and losers.
Do you have any projections on how many jobs your bill could produce?
Well, I think there's going to be more. So, but I mean, I think if you take a look at just the Mille Lacs situation alone and look at the opportunities there, if you take a look at the potential for water infrastructure in southwestern Minnesota, not only in agriculture but other sectors of the economy, we're talking tens of thousands. So it's not only the jobs that are being created, it's where it's being created in those areas that need the most help. Other questions?
I have a question for the chairman, if I could.
Okay, so is there anything else for me though before I leave? Thank you very much. Good to see everyone.
Thank you.
You want to?
Representative Hamilton? Yes. Question for you regarding farm safety. Can we talk a little bit about that? Do you want to get up? We can move you. All right, then, that's all right, but I have to get you on. Well, I'll get you after. How's that?
You know, and that's, you know,
We can just put.
no,
No, that's fine. I can get you.
we'll get this room set up for people with disabilities at another time.
Is that an issue?
You know what it is? It is, in certain areas, it is, yeah. But, I'll catch you at another time.
Yeah, well, I'd like to do it before the session today.
Okay.
Okay.
Chairman McNamara, can you tell us what Minnesotans will see different in parks, for instance, if your bill passes?
Don, we included, though we did fully fund DNR Parks and Trails last year, they came back with a supplemental request, and we're giving them $2.3 million. They've had additional costs within the agency in regards to their cost to deal with Obamacare that's left them short. And so this money will help them to keep all their parks. They testified in committee that no parks will be closed, not even for one day. There will be no reduced hours for the state parks. And so with our funding level, we think we're fully funding them to their needs.
So the public won't notice anything new, they won't be facing closings or staff shortages?
Well, I think there's a lot of new things going on with state parks.
I mean, because of your bill today, not,
Our bill includes $2.3 million of additional money for DNR. If they were not to get that, I think it would be tough for them. But with our bill, we're doing good things for them, and I think DNR, you know, they've got this new online reservation that's much more streamlined now, and it's going to work real good. So we think DNR is set up. You know, I didn't touch on, they also have a new helicopter that just got delivered for DNR for firefighting capability and for all their different agencies, including their conservation officers. So I think DNR is set up real well
is
going
it a
in.
black helicopter?
Actually, it's painted blue. It's DNR colors, blue and yellow with the Minnesota DNR on the side. It's not black. But I think it hauls around a black bucket for fighting fires, a 400-gallon bucket for dropping water or chemical on fires.
Sure, Garofalo, I just have a quick question. So what's the total amount of money in the supplemental budget? I see some of the figures compared to what happened in the budget session last year, but how much new money is involved here?
Additional resources beyond the budget we passed last year is an additional approximately $12 million.
Okay, so just 12 million is what's additional on top of what's already here.
In addition to what's reprioritized within existing spending.
Got it, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.